All right, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We got a very special edition of the Give and Go podcast. We're going to do a little short conference tournament breakdown. We have NJ.com writer Brian Deakyne. Brian, thank you for taking time out today. I know it's getting busy for you with the postseason, but thank you for taking time out today and joining us.
Sure, guys. Happy to be a part of it.
Thanks,
Uh,
appreciate it.
yeah, my first question. How long have you been doing this for NJ.com?
This is my sixth year on girls basketball.
Now, I'm going to bring up St. John Vianney right away. Is this the best team you've seen in 6 years? Do you think it's better than last year's team?
Yes, definitely better than last year's team, and I think the parallel that people are starting to make, and I've talked about a little bit, is actually with Franklin of 2 years ago, the 34-0 team. I think there's actually a lot of similarities with they had Diamond Miller. This team obviously has Maddie St. Rose, but I think this Vianney team is probably even 10 or 15 points better than that Franklin team based on what they're doing to teams right now. It is just unbelievable. The Saddle River Day game was one thing. The Rutgers prep game yesterday was something completely different. It is just, it's by far the best team that I've seen.
Is in your 6 years, is Maddie St. Rose the best player you've seen?
That's a tough question. That's a tough question. I think
I
you have
like
to
to
put
ask the hard hitting ones.
Yeah, I think you have to put Dara Mabry right in that conversation. She was a different breed of a high school athlete that I've ever covered. Just a total, alpha, go take the game over. And Maddie is such a quiet, composed kid. And I know Dawn says that all the time about her, but it really is. I mean, she is one of the most genuine and kind athletes I've ever covered.
Yeah.
And in terms of her abilities on the basketball floor, I think that's part of kind of her Maddie St. Rose's thing is that she just, it comes out of nowhere. She'll just step back and hit a three in your face and go back and do it again and again and again. So I think, if I have to answer that question, I would probably go, Maddie St. Rose one, probably, and then Diamond Miller and Dara Mabry are probably 1A and 1B, like right there. I think they're all really close to each other.
It's like we know how hard Maddie St. Rose works, but it looks so effortless during the
Yeah.
games. It's almost like you're waiting for her to explode, and she has 20. You look up, she has 20 points. You're like,
Yeah.
where'd that come from?
Yeah, I made that point to Dawn after the Saddle River Day game. She
Yeah.
missed like her first two or three shots, and you're like, oh, maybe this isn't going to be her day. And in the next two or three possessions, she drives to the rim. She has that that great finish with her left hand, and then goes right to her 3-point game. And it's so effortless with her.
That's what kind of makes it even more impressive because, she could shoot the three, but, that Saddle River game, she finished with 28. And, when I was looking at the box score, I go, she had 28 points and, not a lot of three, it's just her ability to score anyway, pull up jumper, go into the hoop, she needs to knock down the three, she could just do it any way she wants.
There's a lot of games like that where I'm tracking it, and I get to the end of the third quarter. I'm like, oh, Maddie, I don't know how many points she has. And I tally it up. It's like 24, 25
Yeah.
against really good teams. And you don't
Realize it.
how good she's playing just because it's all part of her game and she's such a team player. And I just want to say, like, when she has a very good chance to be the first 3-time player of the year, especially the season that she's had. And when I interviewed her sophomore year, like most like younger underclassmen, like they don't really know how to answer the questions, and she deflected all the praise you could possibly give her onto her teammates. And 2 years later, she's doing the same thing. Every time I talk to her, it's all about helping her team, all about helping her team win, especially after the All-American game snub, probably the best game of her career. You could talk about that one or maybe the short conference semi her sophomore year when she had 36, but and she was all about like, this wasn't about me. It was about helping my team win. And I think it just speaks volumes to the kind of kid that she is and certainly the kind of athlete that she is.
Yeah, when she won our Player of the Week, I talked to her for only a couple minutes. It was my first time ever, speaking with her, and you could just tell right away, such a great kid, and Princeton's getting a good one.
Yeah, no doubt, no doubt.
One more question, I have before we get into short conference. How, you cover the whole state. It's you and Luis, is it Luis or
Lewis, yep,
Lewis?
yep.
You had Brandon as your tag team partner for a while. How difficult, especially with the talent in New Jersey, is to, spread yourself out, trying to, recognize all these kids.
Yeah, I mean it's difficult. It's certainly difficult. You guys like know what it is like to cover the shore.
Yeah.
And then you just, multiply that by 15 and that's where I'm at with 15 different leagues. Yeah, it's a lot of traveling, a lot of late nights. I'm often never home for dinner, or it's 10 p.m. stops at Taco Bell on the way home. But yeah, you touched on it. I mean, there's so much talent. Obviously, the Shore is the best, and everywhere I go, people want to talk about Shore Conference basketball, and there's
Hmm.
a reason for it. I mean, there's 5 teams right now in the top 20, and most years there's 7 or 8, honestly, that are in that conversation. So it's it's in its own it's in its own league, really. And the way that one coach described it to me from Bergen County a couple years ago was that the Shore is the ACC of New Jersey girls basketball. And I mean, it really is, though. When you think about the teams that are at the top, there's a reason there's multiple Shore teams in the TOC every year. But yeah, it's a challenge. Luis is actually the 4th different partner I've had in
Wow.
6 years. So there's been a kind of revolving door there. I'm hoping and I'm confident he's here to stay. But yeah, it's tough, and we've always tried to split it up as fairly as we can. And when Brandon was with me, it was pretty obvious or pretty easy for him to just take most of the north,
And you
and for
took
me
the
to take
set.
most of the central and south. But it's a lot. It's time consuming. I don't really know how to answer it, but it's tough. And basketball is by far the most grueling and demanding sport
Yeah.
of the 3 that I do. I mean, not just like the season's the longest, but the games are at night, and parents and people just tend to be more passionate about girls basketball than my other sports.
All right, so I have a question about covering the state. In what part of the state do you find the most respectful fans, and in what part of the state do you find the most knowledgeable fans?
Oh man, knowledgeable. I would say the Shore. I think from from the coaching to the parents, like people are more involved in basketball year round in the Shore than anywhere else. Um, Respectful. That's a tough one. 'Cause I was at the Bergen County quarterfinals on Saturday for 4 games, and the parents that were riding the refs pretty hard for 8 hours. And South Jersey, they can be pretty passionate too. And there are certainly people when I'm down there that remind me that I don't cover South Jersey enough. So that's a tough one too. I don't know about most respectful. I think it's pretty balanced across the board.
All right.
Um, Somerset County is a good county for girls basketball too. It's very good. Skyline Conference, obviously Rutgers Prep, Franklin,
Mhm.
Gil St. Bernard's is always very good. So that's another one. That even like 2 or 3 years ago, I think the Skyline Conference had like a legitimate argument against the Shore as one of the best in the state. But this year the Shore is just better than everybody else.
Yeah, well, St. Giovanni. Um, what 5 teams are in the top 20 right now for the short? RBC
Vianney,
squad.
Vianney, RBC, Squan, Donovan, and Rumson.
Donovan. Yeah, that a big turnaround for Rumson this season. Yeah.
Yeah, and you
Um,
had to feel like that was coming sooner rather than later. I mean, Dave Callahan is too good of a coach for that team to continue on the 2-7 stretch that they were on, and it's just too athletic of a team and too good of a shooting team. Eventually, they were going to find their way, and when they did, they found it in a big way.
yeah. Um, when we had Corsatino on a couple of weeks ago, she answered it perfectly. I asked if, were they worried at all? And she mentioned after the Trinity and Rainey losses. And, that's where I would have pinpoint, 2 games they were figuring they were going to get back on track and, lost. But yeah, that's a dangerous team. Doug, you have anything else to ask before I guess we could dive into shore?
No, most of my questions are about the seeding and where teams landed and stuff. So we
Yep.
can get into that.
Actually, before we get into shore, explain the PowerPoints. Do you, do you even know how that
If you
works?
can.
Yes, and my email inbox has been just filled with PowerPoint questions from coaches. So basically, the difference this year is that, and they did it for soccer too, is that instead of using your first 13 games,
Uh,
you're going to use your best 13 games. And
uh-huh.
a big reason behind that is because in basketball, teams are at their 13 games in mid-January. So
Yes.
essentially, the last month of the regular season until the cutoff date was, you know,
Pointless.
yeah, pointless
For
for
statement,
another.
yeah.
Yeah, pretty much. So the idea was to make games a little more meaningful down the stretch. So it is your best 13 games. Uh, what has happened though is that a lot of the coaches have realized that there's a way to manipulate this in a way where you can just schedule games late in the season, especially with the state adding 4-game weeks, that you
Hmm.
can kind of backload your schedule a little bit. Once you see how the PowerPoints are stacking up and see what you need to hit your max number,
You
then you
could
can
add a
find a
tough
way.
game and
Yes.
that you can win and get some points. Okay.
Yeah. So That's been a big talking point among coaches this year.
Now
I
is
guess
that best? Is it best 13, meaning your 13 toughest opponents, your 13 highest ranked opponents? Is that how they do it?
It's the 13 games that give you the biggest amount of power points.
Okay.
that's different from our day when it was you had to be 500 and you were in.
Yeah.
That was similar to the way that short conference goes. Um, One more, last year the way the Shore Conference did the tournament, different pods. Were you a fan of that? Do you think, to me, it gave the weaker teams some chances to get some extra games in at the, against competition, their level.
Yeah, definitely. The Shore, especially, like we could talk about the first round games, and there's some games that could certainly be upsets in that first round, but you get to the second round, and there's almost no chance that
Mhm.
any of those top teams are losing. So it does give the weaker teams, or I don't even want to say it, but the teams that don't realistically have a chance to go into the quarterfinals or semifinals, a chance to really win meaningful games in the tournament.
Yeah. And I know the last year we didn't have states, but I figure, back to normal years, like this year with states, it could give those weaker teams that are going to make the states, a little more confidence going, if they can win a couple games, like with similar school size, group size and all that. I was a big fan of it. I know a lot of the coaches were, but we'll see what kind of changes are made in the
Yeah, and
future.
there was a league, the Tri County Conference in South Jersey, kept it going this year. So they did
Okay.
a 3-tiered tournament, basically 3 different brackets, A, B, and C, and they're playing that through.
Yeah, I mean, I think since I've been back to basketball, even the quarterfinals have been blowouts. Just the same. The last few years, you had the Manchesters, the St. Roses, the SJVs, the RBCs, and Swans. There were 5 teams that were always up there.
Yeah, that's kind of been the MO of the Shores at the quarterfinals. They usually fall on like a day where it's also like quarterfinals and other tournaments, and I
Yeah,
almost never choose the
yeah,
Shore because it feels like
the
there's a
blowouts.
huge drop off from 4 to 5 every year. So even if that 4 to 5 game is good, 3 to 6 is probably not going to be good because the top three in the Shore are usually top 5 in the state. So it's
It's funny,
tough.
looking at the seedings this year, it might not be that way this year. Just looking at the way the teams are ranked, I'm hoping it's not, but you never know. Um, you know, 4-5, 3-6 looks pretty good. I mean, 1-8 obviously is not going to make a difference, but hopefully those other games can be a little more competitive this year.
Yeah, I think the 4 and 5 and 3 and 6, if they go chalk, I think those would be two really intriguing matchups.
Um, we had 2 years ago. I think it was St. Rose 4, Rumson 5, and I think St. Rose won by 30. And I think they were 4-5. They might have been 3-6, but I think they were 4-5. And I was at it was ugly. We thought, oh well, this is going to finally be the game that's going to be close. And it wasn't. All right, let's get into the short conference tournament. The one seed, obviously St. John Vianney. The big question is, could somebody get within 30 of them? I'm guessing, especially after what they just did to Rutgers Prep.
Yeah, I've only been doing this for 6 years, so I can't really speak to the history of the short conference tournament, but I would be hard pressed to find a team that might be a heavier favorite than Vianney this year. Like, you're right. I mean, is 30 the number? Is 40 the number? Like, I
Yeah.
really don't know. It could be up there.
And just going back to the Saddle River game, I thought Dawn was being nice because whenever she got it to like 24, either Zoe or Madison came out, and then Saddle River would get it to like 17 and right back in, and then boom. So that's some squad. They can do whatever they want, and that they stay in their game. They don't care what you throw at them; they're sticking to their game plan.
Yeah, and it's the depth too that's just it's unmatched anywhere. And some coaches said it to me on that game after the Saturday River Day game. They were not this deep last year, and I'm like,
Yeah,
no. And what are you gonna do? Because they have 3 or 4 6'2" or 6'3" kids that can just roll in and they're
yeah.
gonna give you basically the same that the kids that just came off the floor. It's there's really not much you can do about it.
I mean, when you're I won't say big girl, but when your 5 is running the floor and getting fast break layups, there's not much you can do about that.
Yeah, it's unfair. It's unfair.
Doug, you've seen a lot of short conference basketball. Any teams in your mind, going back like '90s, 2000s?
See, it's funny. Every time I see St. John Band and I'm like, oh, this is their best team. And the next year, oh, this is their best team. But I got this team. It
Yeah,
has to be their best team.
yeah,
It's not even close. I mean, I've said it from the beginning. You can put 12, any of the 12 girls in, and you really don't lose much. So, I've been saying, take their second five, take their bench, and
hmm
you got a top 5 team in the Shore, top 20 team in the state. But if they were a separate team, so that's who you're practicing against all the time. Obviously, you're going to get better as the season goes on, and most of their practices are better than 18 of the games they play every year. So I mean, yeah, I'd say this year's team, and I know the last couple of years Manchester played them in the final, and they had Katie Hill, and that's the year they beat us. And then the year before, I thought their team was stacked, 4 Division I players, and I really didn't know how Manchester was going to beat them, and we ended up beating them. But I thought that team was great. I think this team's better than that team.
Yeah, it's funny how much kind of the perception of St. John Vianney has changed. You talk about that team from 2 or 3 years ago that had 4 Division I kids, but it always felt like they were missing a little bit of
Mm-hmm.
something, and like they lost that game to Manchester that really they probably should have won, and a couple other games. But now you look at them, it's like it feels like a totally different
Yeah, they're not going to
program.
lose that game, right?
Yeah, yeah, it's remarkable.
yeah. Um, you want to just go through the seeding, or you want to go bracket, like who they would play? You don't care. We'll go through seeding. So to RBC, Justine's been out for a few weeks. Unsure when she's coming back. Um, but that's where they should. They won the head-to-head to Manasquan. Odds are that's who's probably going to meet in the semis. Brett, what's your thoughts with RBC, especially if they get Justine back?
Yeah, I mean they've been without her for so long, and they've kind of found a way to play without her. That Rutgers prep game, was
Yeah,
really revealing, and the game that they could have won, and honestly probably should have won, holding
yeah,
Rutgers prep to
Yep.
2 points in the fourth quarter and forcing them to stall out the way that they did. And you got to think if they have Justine in that game, they win it. So, yeah, I mean, I was talking to really them winning the WOBM the way they did in such convincing fashion made you see what this RBC team can be, especially that coming a couple of days after they got, kind of run out of the gym by Saddle River Day.
Mhm.
So I think this team has steadily gotten, a lot better. And I think it'll be about Justine being able to come back in and reinsert and then to kind of keep going, right? And not have to find a way to gel and get playing together again. But I think if they can do that, they should be the team that's facing St. John Vianney at the end of this tournament. I mean, Manasquan is certainly in that conversation too, but RBC did beat them, by 20 points already. So you would have to believe that RBC will be the team and probably should be the team that's facing Vianney, in Toms River on the 27th.
And Joe's got a tough task because obviously inserting Justine back in the lineup makes your team better. But which one of those 5 that are playing really well now is going to lose minutes? Because he's got the 2 freshmen playing really well.
really well.
And you really don't want to take minutes away from them. Emma Carmen's playing well. You don't want to take Allie out such a force, but you got those kids playing so well now, you're going to have to take minutes away from 1 or 2 of them. So that's going to be a tough task for him. But I think you're right. I think they're probably the team, if healthy and everybody's hitting on all cylinders, to give St. John a game.
Yeah, and that's probably why you want Justine back before like the semifinals.
Yeah.
Because that's a tough thing to do going into that game where, Manasquan's going to give you everything they can. And so you're going to want to have that figured out at least a little bit, before you get to that kind of make or break game in the semifinals.
I just want, Tessa and, the 2 freshmen, Tessa and Christina, they play with such a confidence level out there. They don't play scared. They don't act like freshmen out there. He's going to be able to build something, with those 2 players going forward. Probably the 2 players competing for freshman of the year, and sure, I'm guessing those 2, So, yeah, but yeah, they need Justine back for that St. John Vianney game, and hopefully she heals up, and especially for the state run. They're in non-public A, right? Still,
Yep.
yeah, South A. So next, Manasquan, the 3 seed. Probably the second deepest team in the Shore, but just blown out, like you said, by RBC. They had a tough loss the day after the mainland game they had a tough loss, and they had a tough game against Mainland. You've probably seen them more than I have. What's your thoughts on Manasquan?
Yeah, I still feel like we're waiting to see the best version of Manasquan.
Mm.
Like they've won so many of those close games, and they could have lost all of them. They could have lost to Sparta. They could have lost to Mainland. They
Paul
certainly
the
could have lost
sixth.
to Paula Six last
Mm.
weekend. But they haven't, and I think that the fact that they haven't is a good thing for this team. I mean, you got plenty of experience across the board with those seniors. I mean, between Mary Donnelly and Georgia and Brooke and Dorothy, obviously you have so much experience there. And I think that you can see in those games, I was at all those games, there's kind of that no panic in them.
Yeah,
And it's the experience that they lean back on. But I still think that we're kind of waiting to see the best version of
yeah,
this Squan team, because there hasn't been like that one game where I'm like, that's it. Like Manasquan is moving. They're on a path to a deep run here. And I think facing RBC might be the thing that gets them going. But
mm,
we'll see. I mean, I posed this question a few times to Lisa and some of the players, like asking if they're just too balanced. Because it's like any one of them is capable of taking the game over, but it's like sometimes you're waiting to see who it's going to be. And
yeah.
sometimes it's Georgia with her defense. Sometimes it's Brooke knocking down a three. Sometimes it's Hope, who's obviously stepped into a big role for them this year. Sometimes it's Rylan Orlando or Katie Collins, who have been sensational coming off the bench
Mhm.
all season for them. So it's like, it's such a different team from those Manasquan teams that went to the TOC that had Faith and Dara and Lola. Like it's such a different team from them. But I think, Lisa's one of the best coaches in the state for a reason, and she has her team ready to go. And I think, going against RBC in the semifinals, if that's what it is, I think that could be a breakout moment for that team.
And those past teams, you're right. You knew who the finishers were. You knew who was going to get the ball at the end. It wasn't a question. And I think they've turned their defense up a lot in the last couple of weeks. But I think you're right. They haven't played their best offensive game yet. And if they ever get to that point where every starter and all the 3 or 4 kids that come in off the bench are playing like that, they're a tough group, especially with the way they're playing defense now.
Yeah. Yeah, that job, Mary and Georgia did in the Paul the game. Mary, containing Hannah. I don't know, what did Hannah have? Only a handful of
21
pants in the first half.
Yeah,
Yeah.
7.5 or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, and Georgia, several big blocks in the second half, helped turn that tide around. So, um, and Katie Collins is a force on defense coming off the bench. With her length, could cause a problem. So,
Yeah, and defense has always been kind of the identity of Manasquan, even though it was sometimes veiled or shielded maybe because they were so good offensively. So
yes,
you could kind of gaze at everything Dara and Faith were doing without realizing how good they were defensively. And I think this year we're really seeing just how good this defense is, and it's that's what's gonna drive them to
Mhm.
wherever they go in this tournament and the state tournament.
yeah. Shout out to Lowe, a big 3-pointer. That's why I'm rocking the Harvard hat today at the buzzer. Did you see that shot at the buzzer?
No.
Yeah,
No, it's like a
against you
20,
against UPenn.
25 footer.
They were down 3. She had a 3-pointer at the buzzer to go overtime. Um, I'm gonna skip 4 and 5 right now. We'll talk Homedale and the possible Matt versus Lisa matchup in the quarterfinals. Um, I spoke to Matt, last week a little bit about it. He was asking my seeding predictions, and I gave it to him. He goes, "Oh, great, me versus Lisa in the quarters." Um, Weird team, me and Doug were at the coach's choice. It looked like some of them were a little bit afraid. They weren't playing, confidently in the first half against Morris Catholic, who was a great team. Not a team I've seen a lot this season. What's your thoughts on Homedale? I mean, because they have a pretty good starting five, and they got some length. Not a lot of teams have that.
Yeah, for sure. There was a case probably 2 or 3 weeks ago for them to be, at the 5 in this tournament, maybe even
Yeah,
the 4 if they kept winning. And then obviously the Rumson game happened, but you're right. Like their length is what makes them stand out for sure. And that was a really tough matchup for them against the Paldo
yeah, very
twins
fast team.
and
Yeah,
Morris Catholic. Yeah, I was talking to Matt before the game. He knew it was a tough matchup, and anybody facing them has, other than Vienny this year, has learned how tough of a matchup that is. So I think you're right. Maybe they were a little tentative in that game. It was the first game of the day,
yeah,
obviously.
early game.
But they're better than the way they played in that game. And I thought that it was the first half, they were lucky to be as close as they were
Yeah,
at halftime in
Yeah.
that game. And then it we kind of saw what Mia Paldo can do in the third quarter, and the game kind of got blown open. But yeah, you're right. The 6-3 matchup is maybe the most intriguing matchup in this tournament, just because of the husband versus wife aspect of it. But which
Uh,
could also happen, by the way, in the state tournament. So
oh yeah, Central Jersey
Yeah,
Group 2.
yeah,
yeah, yep.
Uh, I haven't looked at the seedings. I'm assuming Manasquan's won, right?
yeah, Manasquan, I think New
New
Providence too.
Providence.
Yeah, and they're very good. They're
Yeah.
Yeah.
they're they're a team that's capable of certainly challenging Manasquan in that sectional final if they get there.
And hometown Rumson, right? The other
Yeah,
two. Okay.
yeah.
We'll jump into the 4-5. For Donovan, to me, rightfully so, especially the way they beat Rumson. And I know it seems like ages ago, but they really put it on Rumson in the WOBM. Which me and Doug, we hit them pretty hard early in the season with a little bit of selfishness, the way they were acting on the court, and they seem to clean it up. And to me, they got four legit scorers, if they need, and McKenzie, is pretty good underneath with some height. What's your thoughts on Donovan?
Yeah, Donovan had to be the 4. I know there was some talk that maybe they wouldn't be, but you're right.
Yeah,
That win has to count for something.
yeah,
And even though it was early, it was a decisive win.
yeah,
And if you stack their resume up against everybody else in the shore, I mean, to me, they're clearly number 4
yeah,
behind those top 3. Obviously, they have some work to do to get closer to that gap because they got blown out by Manasquan in that WOBM. But again, that was also early in the season, and a lot has changed. But you're right, they're balanced. It's more than just Gabby and Kaya, obviously, and Olivia Conroy too. Like, they're a balanced team with 4 solid scorers, and I think that they can probably play with anybody in this tournament at this point in the season, other than St. John Vianney. I mean,
yeah,
that would be a tough matchup. But look no further than what they did against Lehigh, like
yeah,
at the coach's choice. Like that's not by accident. And they were leading for most of that game
yeah.
on Saturday. So that is a quality result, and that should, concern anybody that they might face in the short conference tournament, that this team is certainly for real.
Because
I
that
think
team
I
beat.
think they're
Yeah,
yeah. No, go ahead.
I was just say that team beat Manasquan by 15. So
Yep.
Yeah.
yeah,
I think their main problem, which a lot of teams in the shore have, is depth. Because if they get into foul trouble, there's not much coming off the bench, especially the caliber of our first 4. So we've seen Gabby get into foul trouble this year, and if they end up in foul trouble or somebody's not playing well, that could be their downfall, because they just, other than the top 4, 5, they go to the bench. They're not getting much production.
yeah. Um, and if they could keep their heads together, so they would will lead to Rumson. That's a rematch. I'm looking forward to. Because Rumson is not the same team that they played at the WOBM. You covered the whole state. Any teams as hot right now as Rumson is in the state?
I don't think so. When we put them in the top 20, we thought about doing it a week before we did, and at the time they were 9-8, and I was basically like, I don't know how I feel about putting basically a 500 team in,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
especially with 8 losses, because that's a lot of
Yeah.
losses. And then after they beat St. Thomas Aquinas the way they did, like, we had no choice. Like, they had to go in at that point because they're legitimately one of the top 20 teams in the state. So
Yeah.
I really don't think so. I mean, there are a couple teams that have strung together a lot of wins. Ramapo has won 41 in a row, but in terms of hotness and like catching fire at the right time, and especially like kind of a tale of 2 seasons where they looked one way in the first 3 weeks and a certain way ever since, I think Rumson's kind of standing alone in that category.
And they're getting, everyone's getting involved too. It's not just Corsatino. Grace Colucci's had a great couple of weeks. Cahill's been picking it up. Charlie Rosen has really opened my eyes how good of a point guard, she is. And what's they have the freshman that had a pretty good WOV.
Sylvie
Natone. She's doing a pretty good job too. So, if they're on fire, like they're tough to guard because all of them can hit the 3-point, which is probably the only negative is they don't have much size.
Yeah, and that's not exclusive to this year's Rumson team. It's
No.
like every year after Tori Hajduk left, really, it's been kind of like a team like this, so good at shooting. They're going to drive, they're going to kick, they're going to burn you that way. But when they run into a team that has exceptional size, they're going to struggle a bit. So we'll see if they can keep this thing going. But I mean, in terms of this tournament. I think St. John Vianney is the number one team you don't want to face. I think Rumson's number 2 at this point.
Yeah. Who's the 7th? Trinity? Is Trinity the 7th? No, Tom's River North.
Yeah.
Tom's River North. Have you seen them this season?
No, I have not.
Not okay. Me and Doug, we've seen them probably more than almost anybody this season. First of all, because they're right around the corner. Doug got to see the Jackson game, which was a big game for them. They don't that division isn't the greatest after Jackson. So with them, it depends how battle tested they are. I know they tried to add Mainland, but that got canceled last minute. I know she was trying to add some tough games to get them ready. So Doug, I'll let you lead the conversation on Tom's River North.
They're a funny team. Sometimes you watch them and you think, wow, they can challenge most teams in the top 10, and then other times you watch them and you're like, man, they could be a first round out. It's that their level of play has been that different this year that you never know what you're going to get out of a team. And that's another one. Gia Passat obviously is a top player on that team, but sometimes they don't know who's going to take the big shot, and they overpass and a lot of turnovers. So they could, on a good day, they could beat most teams, but on a bad day, they could lose to most teams also.
Yeah. I mean, they're pretty tough defensively. Would they have 3 soccer players on the floor for defense? And, Gia and Jackie underneath, tough defensively. But, yeah, offensively, a lot of turnovers, the games we've been to. So they need to cut that down. And then, who's Jackson have? Howell. So Jackson's, they're going to have to rematch with Jackson, which, a lot of people complain that they didn't schedule the regular season until after the Shore, but you guys are going to get an important game in the Shore Conference tournament. Have you seen Jackson?
No.
Okay. They're tough team. They're big, big body, they dominate the boards. They dominate the boards. And, if Brooks hitting the shot, tough to cover because, there's some games where Brooke will hit 10 3-pointers. And then, Zoe's having a great, probably her season might, maybe all Shore second team the way she's been playing. So that's an interesting matchup in the second round, the 2 Ocean County rivals. But who do you think wins, Doug? You've seen both of them.
I just saw Jackson play Rumson the other day, and I mean, it's Jackson's lack of depth is glaring. And Rachel only plays 6 people, and only if she has to play 6 people. So, it's a rivalry. You're always going to get each team's best shot. The fact that Tom's River North won the first game and their second game wasn't the division game, it's going to be in the Shore Conference. I don't know. I'll pick Jackson, but it's one of those games where it could go either way.
I'd probably go with Tom's River North. I know Goody's going to yell at me, but probably the most interesting second round matchup. You got Trinity Hall playing Point Beach. They should win, especially Point Beach has not had a full team all season, from my understanding, with COVID and everything. And then you got St. Rose Mater Dei, which even if I think Rosie is coming back Tuesday, very limited minutes from what I hear, but they should be able to advance without Rosie. Have you seen Trinity Hall? I know you've seen St. Rose.
I have not seen Trinity Hall, but I have seen St. Rose.
Okay. What's your thoughts on St. Rose? With and without Rosie.
Yeah, I mean, they need her back. They need her back, especially for that Trinity Hall game. Because obviously, Trinity Hall, coaches say all the time, sometimes you learn more from a loss than you do from a win. And I think the seeding committee took more from their losses than they did from their wins to seed them at number 8, taking RBC to overtime and even playing them close the first time. So I think, St. Rose is at 9. You could call it politics. There's a respect factor certainly that goes into seeding these tournaments. You see it all around the state. It's not just a Shore thing, and obviously they're super young this year. Like they're really young, and it's a totally different team. And I saw them early in the year against that Chatham game where they were down 17 in the third quarter and came back to win. and it was kind of like a coming of age moment for really the whole team because there were a lot of freshmen that played some huge minutes for them in that game. So yeah, they're young, but they need Rosie back. Like they've kind of they've had obviously the Manasquan game was pretty tough without her, but in order to make a run here, at least get to the quarterfinals, I think if they can't have her, I think it's going to be really tough for them.
Yeah, I was at the Wall game Saturday, and Maggie, she played her heart out trying to help lead her team to victory. She had 5 threes, but what impressed me, she her being the leader, right now, obviously it's her and Rosie's team, but Rosie out. She wasn't pushing, she wasn't trying to do it all herself. She was getting other people involved. She was coaching them on the floor. If the freshman made a mistake, so that really impressed me. And this year, everyone this year's a wash because it's St. John Vianney. But it's that stuff's going to help them next year, especially with these young kids getting so many. Like the Chatham game, the Ewing game. Tough games, and next year I think it's going to pay dividends for Mary Beth and this team.
Yeah, I think it was a great role for Rosie last year to kind of learn from Abby
Yes.
about how to be a leader and how to kind of be that floor general. Because you talk about Abby Antognoli, and that was her to a T. I mean, she
Uh-huh.
didn't always have the biggest numbers in the box score. Wasn't always getting interviewed after the games, but she was the absolute leader of that team the past couple of years. So I think it was great for her to come in as a sophomore, as someone that she can kind of learn from, and then this year to come in and kind of take the ropes and right, kind of set that foundation for next year when with that young talent and with her back and hopefully fully healthy, they could be a serious contender again.
Yeah, another thing, during warm-ups, Rosie was teaching, showing the freshmen, proper stretching. It just you could tell that she's definitely, taking that leadership role and try to make this team, you know, where they've been in the last, few seasons. Uh, Next team I want to bring up, Rainey. Have you seen Rainey?
Nope.
No, it's tough. I know it's tough for you to see all these.
Yeah.
Um, they're playing Point Borough. Uh, they should win that game. Um, and then the rematch versus Rumson, and Sarah Hughes hit that shot to give them the win. But this is not the same Rumson team,
Yeah.
and I'm worried this game might get ugly when they play Rumson.
Yeah, I mean, you're going to have the motivation factor from Romeson for sure. Because, like you said, I also think that was probably the tipping point for this
Yeah,
team where it's either, sink or swim. Either
yeah,
we're going to figure this thing out or we're going to go down to the bottom of the ocean. And they certainly figure things out. So you're right. I think that would be a really, really tough matchup for Rani. And that was a huge win for Rani, too, to kind of cement their status and prove
yeah.
that they're a legit team. And they also went down and played Cherokee. So they've played some tough teams. But I think,
Saddle River, they
yeah,
gave Saddle, only lost by 12 to Saddle River. That
yeah,
was a little eye opening too.
that was certainly eye-opening,
Um,
certainly.
and I think they played Staten Island Academy, which is always has a pretty good
Yep,
squad.
yep.
Um, uh, RBR, Josie, our buddy JT over there. Um, what's your thought? I know she's not eligible for states, but she will be. Do you think they can make any noise and give RBC any type of game?
I mean, what was it? A couple years ago, they did beat RBC.
3 years ago, yeah.
Yeah, and so I mean, anything's possible. I don't want to upset JT. I don't need a phone call from him tonight, but that would be. It's such a tough matchup. It's
Yeah.
so tough, especially with the history of John Truhan, and obviously everyone's aware that he has the ability to come into your building and knock you off, and Joe Montano certainly will be weary of that. So I mean, could it be a game? I think so. I think so, especially that the fact that Trinity Hall took RBC to overtime, and obviously whether or not Justine plays in that game will be a big factor too. But yeah, you're right. I mean, Josie has kind of changed this team. Obviously, it gives Cameron Gardner a different role too, so it's definitely been beneficial for them. And you've seen the results. I mean, beating Monroe is to get into this short conference the way they qualified. Winning
Yeah.
those back-to-back games.
Neptune and
And the second one being Monroe, which is a really athletic Monroe team that I thought would give RBR some trouble just because of the way they play a little bit. For them to win that game the way they did and to get in, I think that they got a lot of momentum. I think they'll beat Tom's River East in the first round for sure. And then could they go into RBC and make that close? I think it's certainly possible.
And not many people, when they need a game to make the cutoff, pick up the number 17 team in the state and beat
Yeah.
them. So
Yeah.
that's a lot of momentum on their side.
Yeah. I mean, when Robbinsville game got canceled, JT, he just wanted a chance. He didn't care who he played. He just wanted to give his girls a chance to, be able to qualify and, this stuff. And, after Iris has been playing really, with Josie there, open her up more. And it's not just her scoring, her passing. I saw, Josie's first game, Iris played phenomenal. It wasn't just her scoring, it was her passing, getting the ball to Gardner, getting the ball to Holloway in good spots. So, they could be a tough team, just a tough matchup, in round two.
Yeah, and you thought Iris could flourish at RBR this year just because of who JT is and what he's done with those types of players in the past,
Yeah,
and she
yeah,
didn't have obviously didn't see a ton of playing time at Trenton Catholic. That was a nationally ranked star-studded team,
uh-huh.
and she bounced around obviously Life Center and Florence too. But you thought that she would be able to come and kind of be that player again for RBR, and through the first month and a half she really has been. So
Yeah,
it's been a good fit for her.
yes. Um, Probably one of the more interesting matchups around Wall Lacey. I know you probably haven't seen you saw Lacey down at Shore Regional, right? Did you
Yeah,
see her?
yeah,
Yeah.
yep.
To me, I think Lacey has some pretty. Me and Doug went to go see them last week. They got some they got some talent. It's just if they could put it together. And Wall coming off that big win. And I know they wanted that game. I know some people say, oh, no Rosie, but a win's a win. In my book, but to me that might be one of the more interesting uh, games around one. Doug, what's your opinion on the Wall Lacey game?
Uh, I thought Lacey was seated a little too low.
Hmm.
I saw them play a couple times. They gave Manchester two 1 point games or a 2 point game and a 1 point game. Um, I thought they were seated a little bit too low, and I think that Wall kind of got the short end of that stick with their first matchup. Um, I think Wall will win, but I think Lacey can give them a game. They have a lot. They're tough. They're a tough team. Everybody on the team scraps. Um, they know their role. They play it well, and um, I don't know. I just think they were seated a little too low, and um, it's going to be a good game. That's
I think Wall too could have been seeded a little bit higher. So yeah, that's probably. I mean, I have Wall that game. I think Colleen's one of the best coaches in the Shore. The way her team plays. So, and I think Wall versus Homedale could be interesting. Matchup in the second round. Um, Last game probably we'll talk about Shore Marlboro. Congratulations Shore. They made it 2 years ago and then got kicked out, and then you know they far Shore goes as far as Riley's going to take them, and that's a Marlboro is one of those other teams that are peaking right now. They're not the same team from the WOBM. I just put them in the top 10. I thought they should have been seeded higher. Just the way they're playing. They beat Trinity 2 weeks ago. But Marlboro's one of those teams that I wouldn't want to face. In the next round.
Yeah, and Marlboro has tested itself too. They played some good non-conference games. I think they went up to Montville, who's a top
Yes.
level team in Morris County. So they're experienced. But if you had to ask me for an underdog team, I think it might be Shore just because of Riley. I mean, anyone that knows what they're talking about, and obviously you guys do in the Shore, Riley's one of the best players in the Shore. And like you said, Shore's going to go as far as she can take them. And you've seen games this year where she has literally carried them to
Mm-hmm.
wins, probably in games where they didn't have business winning them because she's been that good of a player. But you've seen games where they lost because they just didn't have just enough around her, to pull out some tough wins. So yeah, I think as a 19 seed, they're pretty dangerous, at least for one round. I don't think anyone's going on the road to beat Manasquan in the second round, but this to me is probably the most intriguing first round game
Okay.
because I think Riley on the road against obviously the way Marlboro plays and Danny's playing well too. So yeah, that could be a pretty good first round game.
Yeah,
if
Danny.
Brian. If you look at two teams and you look at Rumson and Marlboro, they kind of have the same trajectory. They started off really bad. They started coming on late. Do you think Rumson was more forgiven for their early season stumbles than Marlboro? I mean, that's a pretty big ranking disparity between and I know Rumson's a better team, depth overall, but it seems like Rumson was forgiven a little more for their early season stumbles than Marlboro was.
Yeah, I think you're right, and I think part of it is like what I said earlier. There's a respect factor that goes into it, and Rumson Fairhaven is Rumson Fairhaven. They've been one of the class programs of the short conference girls basketball for decades, obviously going back to George. So I think I think that's certainly part of it. Because you're right, both kind of struggled a little bit early, and honestly, Rumson had some losses like you're talking about, the Randy loss and some other ones where you're like, okay, maybe they're at the time you're like maybe they're going to be like a 15 seed in the short conference tournament, like for the
Or if
first
they
time
even got
ever.
in it. At one
Right,
point, we
Yeah,
wonder if they would
right.
get in.
right, when they're 2-7.
Uh-huh.
So yeah, I mean you're right, very similar trajectories, and yet Rumson is the 5 seed and Marlboro's the 14th. So it's interesting. I wasn't in the room, but I'm sure that there was some debate about where those teams ended up where they did.
Um, last matchup, I skipped over Colts Neck Neptune. Unfortunately, the winner, which they're in the same division, so they already saw St. John. So
Yeah.
having to play St. John Vianney 3 times in a season, could you get any more punishment than that?
I don't think so. It might be like a 90-10 game in the second round of the short conference tournament, which should never happen. But
No, it shouldn't, and that's going to be one of those games where Dawn tells us he had practice before 2 hour practice before the game with the
Yeah.
varsity. So, I mean, we went through almost all the teams. I know I, skipped over Modern Day and Point Beach, but um, overall, top. Do you think the top 4 seeds are getting in? I mean, the Donovan Rumson game to me is the most, especially come the quarters. That I know we touched on Homedale and Manasquan, but as far as where teams rank, that's a pretty even matchup. Do you think? Do you think Rumson could revenge that loss early in the season?
yeah, I do. I think ultimately we're going to be looking at the semifinals with Vienna against Rumson and Manasquan against RBC in kind of a typical short conference semifinals. Like the same
Yeah.
teams are in it, year after year. But I do think that Rumson right now, the way that they're playing, and you talk about kind of the motivation factor, like with the Randy game. I think if they get a chance to play Donovan Catholic in maybe the most competitive game of the quarterfinals that day, I think they certainly have a chance if they're shooting the ball. But the way they have been the last 2 weeks, that they can certainly win that game.
I was thinking this a big factor in that quarterfinals. It's not at Tom's River this year. It's at Middletown South, and I've sat through the whole day there quarterfinals the last few years, and traditionally good shooters sometimes struggle in that Tom's River arena.
Mm-hmm.
Corsentino struggled a little bit in the WOBM, shooting the ball from deep. The game being at Middletown South, I think is a big factor and it could benefit Rumson because, go back a couple years ago, they played St. Rose in the quarters. They couldn't shoot the ball outside. They were missing everything. WOBM, they've struggled to shoot the ball, in that arena. And it's no fault to them, I've seen players struggle, great shooters struggle in that, I guess, that perception. And I was talking to Tom Scalafani, I think, about it during the coach's choice. Do you think that's going to play a factor, the quarters being at Middletown South instead of Tom's River?
Yeah, that's a great point. That's a tough arena, RWJ, which
Yeah.
was previously Ritaco Center and previously Pine Bell Arena and 7,000 other names.
Poland
That's a
Spring
tough,
Arena.
yeah, that is a tough place to play when it's like 1/8 full.
Yeah.
And like we've been there like for the Group 1 final, it's usually the first game of the day. And there's
Nobody's
like
there.
200 people there, and you're like looking around. It's like shooting in a canyon. And so yeah, I think that's a really good point. You take it to a high school gym where there's not seats behind the baskets and it's pretty normal. I think that could certainly play a factor in that game.
Yeah, that's the one game where that to me, points out and where it could be a factor. Just knowing the history Rumson's had at Ritaco or whatever it's called these days. So all right, so your pick. We talked about this. So you got St. John Vianney RBC finals.
Yeah, I got St. John Vianney RBC in the finals.
Competitive at all finals, or is it going to be? It's
I
the
mean, I
Rutgers
see.
Pratt game that scares me.
Yeah, I know, and there were people after the Saddle River Day game that came up to me like, "How could you have Saddle River Day ranked 2 and Rutgers Prep 3?" And I'm like, "Well, we're about to find out." And then, Saddle River Day lost by 25, Rutgers Prep lost by 39. So, yeah, I mean, I could see RBC being competitive for a half, and I don't want to disrespect RBC in any way because they're a
Yeah,
very good team, but it's
yeah,
just like, the gap between St. John Vianney and everybody else is just so big this year that it's I don't know. And that game's not at Monmouth this year, so it'll be a different atmosphere. It's at Toms River, which is a big change.
mhm.
So, and it's obviously one of the richest rivalries in the history of short conference basketball is RBC and Vianney. So maybe that plays a factor, but I
Yeah.
feel like you get, Zoe Brooks and Maddie St. Rose in that game as seniors. I just, they could put up 100 points, honestly.
A question: why is the game not at Monmouth this year? Is there a
I don't
scheduling
know.
conflict,
Yeah,
or
I don't know. That's a good question. I didn't
okay?
realize it till last
I
week.
think I think it has to do with COVID because you need
Oh,
to be
they
you need to be
require.
you need to be
Okay.
vaccinated or have to have a test before I think that
College
I don't know.
campus.
I mean,
Yeah.
we could probably ask Kevin Williams that, but that just my opinion. That's probably it. Because you
Makes
need to be.
Yeah,
sense.
and it's a shame because that is the best
Oh,
venue for a
great
county
place to play.
final of anywhere in the
Yeah.
state. Monmouth is by far the best. It's
Mhm.
intimate. It's seats
You,
what
yeah, you're
4,000
right on the
people.
court.
You're
Yeah.
right on the floor. Yeah,
Mhm.
it's the best.
In your 6 years, my last question, have you ever seen a number one team put a beating on a two and a three team in the state like that in the last 6 years?
Uh, no, no,
Yeah.
nothing. Not by that.
Okay.
Not that dramatically, at least. I saw Franklin become Franklin. My first year was a year where they were like ranked like 10 or 11 basically all season, and Rutgers Prep was the team. They
Hmm.
were the number one team, and they had a bunch of ranked wins, and then Franklin beat them in the TOC, and then Franklin turned into the number one team for the next year or whatever it was. But no, there's never been a year where it's been this lopsided between 1 and 2, and it's like I don't know if I'm putting a 2 this week. Because I mean, do I put Saturday back there? I mean, Ramapo's 19-0, and they'll have the case too, and they're going to play Saturday in the Bergen County final most likely next week. So that could decide that. But it's like maybe I should number 2 blank. I don't know. I don't know what I'm going to do. It's tough. It's tough.
How many emails or messages do you get after every top 20?
Um, a lot. A lot. Listen, I mean, this is the case that I try to make is that, especially with coaches who are for the most part, they're pretty good.
I figure it's the parents that get
It's
on
a lot of the parents, but it's like people are very locked into their corner of the
area.
state, their
Hmm.
area, which is understandable. Like if you're a parent, for a short conference school, you probably know the short conference
Hmm.
pretty well. But, like I also have to give that same attention to the shore, to every other league in the state. So,
Yeah.
other than David Brown, who does obviously a great job with all the stuff he does, like, is there anyone that sees as much as I do? Like, probably
Yeah.
not.
No.
So, and I felt pretty confident. There are people early in the season that said Saddle River Day had no business being in the top 10, and then they beat RBC the way that they did the second day of the season. So,
Yeah.
yeah, there's a lot. There are a lot of
Also,
people complaining.
Is there a chance Saddle River gets back to full strength before the end of the season? Or
There is a chance with
yeah,
Sanaya Caldwell. Yeah.
okay,
this is her
So
senior year, right?
yes.
Yeah.
yeah,
I remember seeing her when they played Manchester in the
yeah,
TLC.
yeah. Trust I saw them too many times that year.
So, all right. Doug, you got anything else for Brian? Or?
No, that my last question was gonna be if you had a live underdog, but you said sure. Um, is there another one that you think a lower seed that might be able to make a little bit of a run?
Um, I mean, I don't know if you would consider them an underdog, but Wall as the 11, I think
Mhm.
they're probably underseeded a little bit, especially coming off that St. Rose win. And I'll contradict myself, but Marlboro too, like as a 14, I think
Yeah,
I think you said it, like they're underseeded as well. They're probably better than a 14. So I think, whoever wins that game, not that they're going to go to Manasquan and win, but
right, right.
I think there's a chance that those games can be competitive to some degree. It's just tough in the shore, and the shore is one of the few leagues too that kind of has a traditional tournament like this. A lot of them kind of follow similar to like college basketball, where like the top
Mhm.
4 go right to the quarterfinals, and then 5 through 8 go right to the next round, and then there's a play-in round, so teams have a chance to win a couple of games.
Mhm.
So the shore is one of the few that doesn't do that, which changes it up a little bit because even if you win your first round game, the odds are stacked against
Yeah,
you in
Yeah.
this league to win in that second round. So it's tough to have a true underdog. And honestly, I can't remember I wouldn't even know the last time probably like a seed higher than 6 or 7 made it to
Yeah,
like the semifinals in the short because it just never happens.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's true. It's usually every time you look at it, you go, oh, it could be the year where there's a little more parity, and then the top four teams make it, every year. So
Yeah, and the short semis are traditionally one of the best basketball nights of the
yeah,
season because usually you're getting like
D-
number 1 in the state versus number 5 in the state, number 3 in the state versus number 2. But this year it's just like John Vianney's just so
everybody's
much
playing for
fun.
second place this year. So
Yeah,
yeah.
it's crazy. It really is.
I got one more now that you go. Another Maddie St. Rose. What do you think in her, 4 years, her best performance was? Game.
Uh, her best game, you know, her career high of 36 against St. Rose in the short semis was just
That was a
that was
fun
one of
game
those
too.
days. Yeah, and she was like 12 of 13 from the free throw line or
Mhm.
something. So she racked up a lot of free throws late in that game. But I remember
Yes.
getting back after tallying up and coming back to the press table, and I'm like, she had 36 points. And that was really the moment where in my head she was like, all right, she's got a legitimate case for player of the year. Like she's a sophomore, so
Hmm.
it's going to take something extraordinary, but she
Yeah.
has a real case here. And then the season never got finished, obviously, but she was great down the stretch. But I honestly think her best game was probably this year, the Montclair Immaculate game, 2 days after the All American snub,
Okay.
which I mean, call for what it was. It's an absolute snub,
Yeah.
Hundred
and
percent.
it's just it's crazy that it happened. But and I thought maybe she'd be because she's so stoic and so calm. I thought maybe it wouldn't really bother her that much. Like I remember writing about Dara when she got left off and how that was her motivation to
Mhm.
carry that team to a TOC title, which she did that year. And I thought that maybe Maddie would kind of shrug it off a little bit, but talking to some people at Miami, like she was upset by it, and
Yeah.
rightfully so. I mean, it is a prestigious honor that she should have had, but I thought her coming out and scoring 33 against a good Montclair Immaculate team, like a really good athletic team, I honestly think that was her best game. Um, there are a couple others, like she had some good games last year against Paul VI and RBC both times. But to me, it's that game against St. Rose as a sophomore that kind of put her on the map, and really the Montclair Immaculate game that kind of just reinstilled that she's just a different breed. Honestly, she's unbelievable, and also the Saddle River Day game too, because I feel like her, being off a little bit early, and there's a lot of eyes on you in that building. Every
Hmm.
college coach, basically, that's in the country that wants to recruit on the East Coast is there, and obviously there's a lot of media attention. So I think that that's a tough place to play, and for her to struggle a little bit early and then find her game, and then she hit those, two back-to-back threes, and it was like game over at that point. So she's had
You know,
so many good games over the years, really.
you know what they say: beware of the quiet ones. They're always the most deadly. I do have one more question before you go. SJV and Sidwell. Give
Oh,
us a little precursor to that one.
Yeah, I mean that's gonna be a really fun game. I'm pumped that it's put back on the schedule,
Mhm.
and selfishly going to Delaware is a little easier for me than going to the Bronx. So I'm really happy that it's there. No, this is gonna be great. And I was thinking about this the other day. Like, if you're Maddie St. Rose and Zoe Brooks, like you've played more games this year that really don't matter than you have that mattered. So you really
Right.
got to hone in on those games. And this is going to be the biggest game for them. I mean, obviously they're facing the number one team in the country, but you know, like this is going to be a bigger game for them than probably any game going through the TOC. Like, especially if these last two games are any indication, they're going to win the TOC by double digits. So I think this is kind of the moment for St. John Vianney to prove that this team is the best St. John Vianney has ever had. And I've kind of posed that question to Dawn in different ways over the past couple of years, and she's been hesitant to say this is my best team. And last year I tried to ask it a lot. And obviously, like she knew the Gomez's, so and
yeah.
obviously she grew up with
Yeah.
the program. So it's a tough spot for her, but I think this year, like you can't debate it anymore that this is the best team Vianney's had. But going to play the number one team in the country and potentially finishing with the number one team, in the country. Like I always say, it's so hard to put stock in national rankings because I have a hard enough time doing it in the state where
Yeah.
everybody plays by the same rules and is within the same, restrictions and everything. But I think looking at what they did in Tampa against, DME Academy and some of the teams down there, I think Vienna is just kind of built for this. So I'm not really sure what to expect. That Sidwell team is absolutely loaded, and they
Yeah.
have that number one ranking for a reason. But could Vienna go down there and win that game? I really think they can, especially after what they did to Rutgers Prep. I really, really think they have a chance to do it.
Do you know if there'll be a shot clock there?
I don't know if Delaware has one.
Okay.
I'm not sure.
Yeah. Brent Farrell's dad said, because St. Rose played that Sidwell 2 years ago. 2 years ago? 3 years? 2 years ago. And he said that Kiki Rice might be the best player if he's seen.
Yeah.
She's something. So I'm
It'll be a fun
glad.
matchup.
I posed this question to Doug last week. If Dawn had the option, if she had to say Sidwell can only play sometime during the short conference tournament, like a day a game schedule, does Dawn back out of the short conference tournament to go play them? I would say yes.
I think she might. I mean, Dawn is she wants to play the best.
Yeah.
I asked her a couple times last year. I'm like, what are you doing? You're scheduling the number. They were number one. They scheduled number 2, number 3, number 4, number 5, and number 6. I'm like, what are you doing? And she was like, I want my kids to play the best.
Yeah.
Like, some people call me crazy, but after losing a chance to win a TOC 2 years ago, and shortened season during COVID last year, like, she wants to play the best. So I think. Yeah, I mean, she probably knows she would win the short conference tournament by 30 points. So why not back out of that to go play Sidwell? It's crazy.
Yeah. So.
And that's another thing about this Vienna team is that they don't have a TOC to show for the past couple of years, which is bizarre. I mean, COVID has totally destroyed.
Yeah. How good to see.
I mean, you would have looked back 20 or 30 years from now, and see all the TOC titles they won, and be like, wow, that was a good run. But now they're going to have one to show for it. Which is just
and it's going to be the last one.
And it will be the last one. Yep.
So, all right, Brian, I thank you for taking time out tonight and joining us. Have fun during the state run. I'm sure you'll be traveling all over the place. So.
Yep. Cool. Thanks, guys.
I appreciate it.
Thank you.